They threaten us directly or with veiled threats. Of course, we respond as we should. They always take examples. They will tell us, Thomas Sankara tried to do it like this, but where is he? He is dead. Tomorrow our children will grow up. They will ask questions. Were our parents cowards to leave us in slavery? Whether we are alive or dead? We will feel it. We ask them questions about why you don't do as we do, why you don't support us. Some tell us they are entangled, some tell us they cannot. Dear elders, African heads of state,
in this video, you'll see why Clarence Thomas's apology to Ibrahim Traoré is sending shockwaves across Africa and the West. We'll uncover how a lawsuit designed to weaken an African nation flipped into a moment of moral reckoning for one of America's most powerful judges. We'll trace the forces behind the $500 million case, the resilience of Burkina Faso, and why this moment could mark a shift in how the world views Africa's sovereignty. Stay until the end, because the lessons drawn here aren't just about law, they're about the future of justice itself. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Who could have imagined a $500 million legal strike aimed at one of Africa's poorest nations? The figure alone was staggering, but what made it even more intimidating was how it was framed. This was not the demand of a corporation in search of compensation, or a small legal claim, but a lawsuit stamped with the authority of the American legal system. On paper, it looked official, almost untouchable. The sheer size of the claim dwarfed the financial reality of Burkina Faso, creating the illusion of a verdict before the trial had even begun. For many, it felt less like law in action and more like a declaration of power wrapped in judicial robes. Burkina Faso, under Ibrahim Traoré, was already carrying the heavy weight of multiple battles at once. The country has faced growing insecurity with insurgency movements threatening its people. The economy has remained fragile, with inflation cutting into family budgets and young workers desperate for opportunities. On top of that came the suffocating influence of foreign pressure.
Our children will ask us questions. Imagine if in Burkina we refuse to fight, and we accept to submit to live in slavery. The Haitian president, he tried to do it like this. Where is he? He is dead. Gaddafi tried like this. Where is he? He is dead. These are the veiled statements made to us to instill fear. But I can assure you, youth, that when we find ourselves in their corridors, these same heads of state tell us, you are on the right track. This is what needs to be done for Africa to feel empowered.
As if international players expected the nation to bow down whenever bigger forces pushed against it. Into this climate dropped the threat of a $500 million lawsuit, striking with perfect timing to exploit a country already stretched to its limits. To put the number in perspective, imagine this. Burkina Faso's annual spending power is nowhere near the budget of wealthy nations. With a national budget that hovers only a fraction of the lawsuit's total claim, $500 million would represent a massive slice of its operating capacity. It would be as if an entire year's worth of schools, hospitals, and crucial infrastructure disappeared into the hands of a foreign judgment. For ordinary citizens, this was not some distant legal filing. They saw it as an attempt to starve a nation into submission, not with bombs or armies, but with signatures and courtrooms. And that's where the true nature of this case becomes clear. It wasn't about justice, or even about balancing rights. It was the use of law as a weapon, legal terms turned into chains. Instead of standing as a shield to protect, the courtroom was made to function as a hammer to break. For a leader like Traoré, the message was unmistakable. Bend to the demands of stronger powers, or face punishment far beyond the country's means to resist. When David faced Goliath, it was already a story of impossible odds. But here, Burkina Faso was facing something greater than just one giant. It was up against the entire machinery of an empire built on rules designed elsewhere and imposed without mercy. In Ouagadougou, this didn't pass quietly. Ordinary people interpreted the lawsuit as more than a legal challenge. It was a direct insult, a slap in the face to their sovereignty. They spoke with anger about how it wasn't just Traoré under attack, but the dignity of their nation itself. Images spread of youth gathering in public squares, determined to show their leader that he was not standing alone. The resentment hardened into something more enduring: resolve. If outsiders believed they could humble the people of Burkina Faso with a lawsuit, lawsuit, they miscalculated the fire they would ignite. Yet that raised the question, how could one young military leader, standing virtually alone against the structures of American law, possibly withstand this without breaking? The lawsuit nearly smothered reforms before they could take root, and the financial risk alone could have meant surrender. Instead, Traoré refused to yield. He turned what looked like a crushing blow into a rallying point, proving that weakness can transform into resolve when a people stand behind their leader. Which leads us to the most unexpected twist of all, what drove Clarence Thomas, one of America's most towering judicial figures, to step forward with an apology that defied every tradition of silence inside the US Supreme Court. Judges of his stature rarely admit fault, but why did Clarence Thomas choose to apologize now? For decades, Thomas has been a symbol of judicial firmness, someone who maintained distance from outside pressures and upheld the secrecy that has long defined America's highest court. Yet suddenly the silence was broken, and not for some administrative correction or minor point of law. His words were directed across the Atlantic to an African leader who only recently had been the target of crushing legal action. That reversal left many stunned, and it raised a deeper question. What compelled someone like him to step outside tradition and confront his own role in a global power play? The story begins with the way the lawsuit against Burkina Faso gained legitimacy through the machinery of the American system. Though he may not have drafted the case, Thomas's authority helped reinforce the belief that this suit carried weight. Each signature and ruling connected to the process carried a shadow of his position, creating a climate where challenges to Traoré's leadership seemed not only possible but inevitable. This atmosphere of suspicion was crafted carefully, and in those early moments, Thomas stood as one of its guardians. To then turn around and issue an apology meant rethinking not only his past actions, but the system he represented. Inside the legal world, silence is often more powerful than speech. Judges at the highest ranks rarely step into public affairs, and apologies are nearly unheard of. Tradition dictates that rulings speak for themselves, and the humanity of those on the bench is hidden behind formality. That's why his decision to speak openly shocked observers. It wasn't part of a legal opinion, nor a carefully polished lecture. This was a moment of vulnerability broadcast to a world unaccustomed to seeing Supreme Court justices admit fault. Breaking such a storied tradition sent a signal. Something inside him had shifted. That shift revealed itself when he admitted he had been used by those who fear Africa's rise. These words carried the weight of self-awareness, a recognition that even at the heights of authority, manipulation is possible. By framing himself as a tool of those who sought to restrain Africa, Thomas delivered not only an apology, but an acknowledgement of the forces pulling strings behind the curtain. For someone long known as unflinching, this admission of being shaped by external fear introduced a rare sign of humility. Across Africa, the response was electric. In Ouagadougou, large screens showing the apology drew applause from crowds who felt vindicated after months of strain under the weight of foreign pressure. In cities from Dakar to Nairobi, youth chanted and waved flags, calling it proof that inequality could be cracked, and that even the most powerful could be pressed into humility. It was not seen as ceremony, but as transformation, a closing of distance between the powerful and the powerless for perhaps the first time in living memory. So what made Clarence Thomas abandon decades of silence for a public act of contrition? At its core, it was the realization that he had become a voice of fear rather than justice, and that truth forced him to bow before the very people his silence once threatened to harm. Now the question waits: what does this mean for Africa's sovereignty and the way global powers will have to engage with the continent in the years ahead? The apology marks more than a personal moment between two men. It signals a deeper shift in how Africa must now be engaged, with sovereignty recognized not as a concession, but as an inherent right. This is no longer about whether the continent deserves respect. It is about accepting that respect is due by default. For us, the lesson is clear. Accountability cannot be selective. If the weak can be judged, so must the strong. This moment is not a conclusion, but a beginning, where law, dignity, and power intersect in ways that will reshape tomorrow's balance of justice.